boy needs therapy.
Lying down on the couch.
Frontier psychiatrist.
Well, we'll just go ahead and start where I can introduce you. And so I'm here with J.F. Bierlein. Am I saying that correctly?
Close enough.
Normally, I kind of maybe over-prepare for these, but it's been such a crazy week. I've rescheduled 3 times, and I don't have a ton of structure to the interview. But I think the themes are going to be mythology and poetry, because you're a scholar and a poet and a gentleman. Anything else?
Oh, golly. You're too generous. I think it's really fun because I just want to give a little background. Joel was very kind, and when he contacted me, he said, I read your books when I was a kid, which made me feel ancient, of course, and really enjoyed them. And it's so funny because I always spend time discussing my books saying, I wrote them 30 years ago. And this is my OCD side where I say, I found the following errors in them. And it's really funny because I got some contact back from people saying, great book, but this was wrong. And I would write back and say, you're absolutely right. And the 3 examples I give are, I was all excited because the city of Mars, Pennsylvania, I thought, it's named after the Roman god. No, named after a man named Mars.
Maybe he was named after the Roman god.
Yeah, it might be. And then the other one I thought was pretty funny was London, the city of London. I don't know where I got this from. I said, it was named after the Celtic god Lugh. And about 8 people said, all from Britain, of course, said, where did you get that crazy idea? So that was another one.
It's Londonium, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a Roman name for it,
yeah.
but yes. And then the third one, which is the one I blush when I admit to, is hetero in Greek means other, right? But hetaira means a courtesan. And so hetairism, I had read it in a different way. And what I was saying was the period of hetairism was believed the period of life analogous to the courtesans. And I missed that completely. Went right over right past my vision. But I cannot start an interview without, confessing those 3 mistakes. And somebody else said to me, well, if you feel that way, then the rest of your book must be pretty good. And I said, well, I hope so,
But I think, it's always normal to make mistakes when you're compiling anything that's the size of a book, but also, it's going to be in anything. But I think what made your books better is that they're not strictly academic. They're about very intelligent concepts, but they're not pretentious. And there isn't that, not even pretension, but there's an academic type of writing where you can tell that someone is used to somebody behind them being like, oh, you didn't cite your source. How do you know that emotion comes from, you're like, okay, just sit with the metaphor for a minute, man. Like, I'm not trying, and then you can tell that there's some people that when they're writing, they're trying to qualify everything and lay out these terms and define what the terms mean and explain why they're there before they say anything. And it makes the books kind of a miserable read, like academic writing has its purpose, but the purpose is research. It's not.
Well, it's funny you should say that because all of the myths I cite in my books, I always have, references in the back of the book. So if someone wants to know, they can look. But what I found most useful is, and this is a result of exactly what you're talking about, reading works saying, a lot of people I talk to say, will you just tell me what the heck this myth says? What is the story? Or what is the narrative? And, I found that people got more out of it. And then what's really interesting is they ask more important questions. And by important questions, I mean, not just about the meaning of the myth, but how the myth informs their sense of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And that I thought was a much better approach than being too dry and academic. And because that's kind of where I was trying to take people, that from reading my books, that, to contemplate and, what was it? The Chinese philosopher Moses used to say that, you can't learn anything without self-reflection. Well, when you read a myth, it's got to be like, how does this affect me? What does it sense on my meaning? And that's kind of where I was coming from. So.
Well, I plagiarized some of it, I think, in like 6th grade for a sermon because it was like a youth Sunday or whatever, and you had to give the sermon at the Episcopal Church. And I was doing something about sitting in the imagery of the Bible or sitting in the imagery of the story, and he had a chapter about water and, water showing up in myths and all these facts about water. And I remember copying and pasting a lot of lines from that into the sermon. So your words have come from the pulpit too.
Well, the statute of limitations is up, so I'm not going to bother you.
I didn't make any money off the sermon.
No, there you go. That's the whole thing. But it's pretty funny though when I hear people have quoted me and so on. A couple of really funny things before I get into some other my later work and what I've been doing. A couple of great funny stories to tell is I'm more popular in Brazil than I am in the United States. And I find this totally funny because they sold the Portuguese rights and I speak and read Portuguese. So I got to read the manuscript, which is pretty cool, and make my little, notes and so on. And I started getting calls for interviews with outlets in Brazil. And what was funny was, and they knew I spoke Portuguese. So it was really funny. And at one point, I think it was, my sales in Brazil were higher than they were in the United States and Canada.
It happens. You hit the zeitgeist of some other country, like the Japan. A lot of times something will blow up there, 10 years later or something. I think it's Brazil. It's some South American country. But there was this show that was like on APT, just Alabama Public Television when I was a kid. And it was like a weirder version of Bill Nye the Science Guy. It was called Beekman's World. So there'd be a guy that was like in a rat costume and they would do science experiments, but it was like real wacky. So for some reason, that is still, no one even remembers it here. For some reason, it's like huge in this South American country. It's like still on TV being rerun. And the guy like went to live there because he's basically a celebrity in this country. But it's a show to teach kids science. It's so weird, but it spoke to something in the culture.
Very strange. I love stuff like that, though. That is fun. But yeah, go ahead, sir, please.
Well, I guess just so for the listeners to introduce you, we've been wanting to talk for a while, so probably want to qualify so other people can understand the conversation. I'm a therapist now. I write a lot about myth and psychology and the fusion of those things and religion and Jung. And a lot of that, I think, I was born in 87, but I think it was still in the water from the 70s, the Joseph Campbell stuff. And I read a lot of like science fiction and fantasy, but I didn't really read a lot of nonfiction. And then it was in 5th or 6th grade, and a friend of our family gave me like a gift certificate to the bookstore. So I went and picked your book out because I opened it to the story of the Hindu pantheon, where I don't have the book on me, but somebody goes to talk to the god, and he's like, "How many gods are there?" And they're like, "Well, there's 130." And he's like, "Yeah, but really, how many are they?" And they're like, "Well, they share an aspect. There's really 50." And he's like, "No, but really, how many are there?" And he's like, "Well, there's 3." It's like, "Well, how many are there?" And it's like, "Okay, fine, you got me. It's really, I'm in all of them. Like, there's really just one, And it was like, and I started thinking about the way that religion, there's a universalness to it, but then there's also something that's very like culturally unique. And then it's this people are talking about basically their life and their existence in a unique voice, but they're all describing the same thing, even though I don't really like the comparative religion trope that all religions are the same. I don't think that's true. And it was like, just opened this door of like what comparative religion was and all this stuff. And I started getting into that, and I read about mythology and all these things forever. And people would always be like, "Well, Joel likes history, so he's reading these stories." And it's like, it's not history, it's psychology, like, but it was, no one really got that. And it really opened a door. So it's exciting to talk to you now and see. So what brought you to wanting to write about mythology and doing those books? We have them in our professional library at work, and we let patients and clinicians borrow them. I tried to grab both of them, and they were both checked out. So hopefully we'll get them back. That's a great introduction. I've always been a person who loved to read stories. I was kind of I guess you'd say, introverted, introspective kid. And I remember one time my parents, I think they wanted to shut me up. So they said, "Let's give this kid a book and he'll leave us alone." And the book was a mythology book. And I got into it. And that's probably about, I would say, 10 or 11. And it was a mythology for children. And it was Greek and Roman mythology and some Norse. And then I said, "This is really good stuff." My grandparents then said, my grandparents said, "This is the birth of an intellectual experience for this child." So they decided that they would festoon me with books.
which I read. And then when I was in college taking a course, I had a wonderful professor. And this guy and I'll give a shout out to the late Theodore Ludwig. And this guy and I could talk for hours about mythology. And he was a fascinating guy. He was a Lutheran pastor and a theologian and a scholar of mythology and all these things. And he said, you know what you need to do? You need to go, you need to get a copy of The Golden Bough by Fraser and go sit on the beach sometime, just read. And I did that. And then it was the whole obsession I had with what are the common things that make us tick? All human beings have stuff that make them tick. And mythology kind of is a record of that search for meaning and what makes us tick, and a reflection of it at the same time, if that makes some sense. And so I thought that was really interesting. And so I just continued to read and everything else. And my addiction to languages and also helped me out, because I was able to then look at some, even some primary sources with 3 dictionaries and a magnifying glass. So you don't think I'm that clever.
How many languages do you speak? You were speaking like in 3 or 4 different languages when we were on the phone telling a story about going to South America.
Oh,
how many languages are you fluent in?
Enough. I'm picking up English pretty well. But actually, my latest thing is Turkish. I really enjoy it. It's not Indo-European. We've made 3 trips to Turkey. I'm going to give a shout out to my wonderful Turkish teacher in Istanbul, Seda Sürel, and you can watch all those great Turkish soap operas and understand them now without subtitles, which is great. And by the way, if you want to talk about archetypes, okay, I'm going to tell you, if you want to know what an archetype is, I will use Turkish drama as a way to explain what archetypes are. Every Turkish drama has the kindly and innocent young lady who is being abused by a wrathful father and or mother. Then there's always the sweet old lady who's the cleaning woman but knows all of their dirty secrets. And then there's always the dashing but poor young man who's the hero. And there's always some vile, rich, spoiled brat kid and his rotten parents. And
Disney movie.
Oh, it is. It's like, Hallmark, all that stuff. What's so funny is if, someone were to ask me, what is an archetype? I'd say, watch a Turkish drama, or actually probably any soap opera, and you find the same type of characters. And I said, really? That is what goes on in myth. You've got very much these archetypes. And where do they come from? Well, Jung tells us that they're images in our collective unconscious. But they occur everywhere. They're fascinating because they occur in every culture. And that was another thing that fascinated me in reading the myths, that they, some of the plots even, I think in one of my books, I say there's a Blackfoot American Indian story that matches to an Egyptian story. I mean, that matches to a Bible story, but the Bible story and the Egyptian story, they were neighbors, right? But the Blackfoot are out in the middle of the North America, and it's just all of the material is there. And Levi Strauss and the structuralists, they love that stuff. But I always felt that it's a sense of meaning is what that's about. That we all, human beings, we're in this time now where people are all tribal, and they don't necessarily.
Well, they're still fighting about myths. They're fighting
I was going to
about
say
mythology.
they don't share myths.
Yeah.
Common myth, and they don't see the commonality of other people's myths or the commonality of other people. And, this creates strife and all stuff. And I, of course, as you do, we try to lessen others' suffering and try to make life a little better for people. And that's one of the things I think you can do through the study of myth is you start saying, I have cultural differences, but what makes me tick is a lot like every other person out there in this world. And that will change how I view and treat other people.
Well, it's interesting with the doing a podcast that's kind of rooted in brain-based medicine and depth psychology is like the Jungian stuff and the depth psychology, like it informs everything. So we've talked to musicians and architects and urban planners. A guy reached out after our urban planner documentary, and he was like, or after our urban planning interview with Andre Strani, somebody sent me their manuscript that now is getting published, I'm proud of him. Maybe he'll be on here one day, but he had written a book about using Jung and mysticism to do urban planning, like how to find the archetypes of way that people want to interact with a designed space. So it's
and all this, there's a lot of things in Jungianism that are just everyday life. You just say, aha, that's it. And I'm not going to get into a long discussion, but I mean, there's archetypalism, but also animus, anima, the shadow, all these things you see manifested, and you more than I'm sure, but you see it manifested all over the place. And they kind of help you navigate a little bit, I feel.
What's a lens that lets you understand yourself and other people in a way that is gentler, I think.
And you
than
can
a lot
navigate, and you can navigate life better, I think.
Yeah.
You know, navigate with that sense of meaning that I think everything boils down to.
So you started reading mythology as a kid, did you ever get into psychology, or you stayed myth? I mean, what did your academic or what did your track look like as a
I won't
professional?
really
You don't want to go into it? Okay.
I won't too much, because now I'm working in a consulting firm. We manage contracts for companies to do business with the federal government, but I went into political science and economics. And I was teaching as an adjunct in the Washington semester program at American University, and I used to tell people my night job was mythology, that I read and did so many things. And I've had a couple of people who are true scholars, which I didn't claim to be in the field, contact me, and they said, we like your book, or we're interested in your ideas, so on. I said, well, I'm going to tell you, I don't have pretension to be, a great deep scholar of the topic. I would say rather I'm a really, really interested amateur. I'm a really very emotionally engaged reader of mythology. And one of the people I talked to actually was a chair of religions at a university, said to me, yeah, but you know what you're talking about. And I thought that was pretty funny. That kind of made my day. So yeah, that was my trajectory. My trajectory wasn't the usual. And as far as psychology goes, I don't think you can study mythology without bumping against psychology every step of the way. I think that in the sense of meaning, I'm, you hear me say it over and over again, but I think that so much is important about human beings having a sense of meaning and navigating their way through life. I think that's the issue.
And I think a lot of the things that used to give us a sense of meaning and hope are going away in the world. Even the younger generations, there's polls and they don't even think the planet will be around for their kids in the same capacity that it is now, or the economic system will allow them to have their kids to have any kind of semblance of life like we have. And not saying that's true or false, but that's a belief, that people who grew up with an iPhone, think before they're 13. They are already sitting with this pretty dark existential stuff. And when you see that in therapy, it's like the generational difference used to be 10 years apart. Now it's like when I see somebody 25 and somebody 19, the difference is vast, the way that they see the world.
Well, and I agree with you. And I also find fascinating all this, the fascination with apocalyptic stuff, like zombie stuff and all that. And, and I've had conversations with very intelligent, rational people who said, zombie apocalypse is strange and probably is very obviously fiction, but that type of apocalyptic thing is not so crazy. And they really think that. And then when COVID came out, I remember a number of people, younger people especially, saying to me, well, this is life imitating art. We've had all these movies like Outbreak and all this stuff, and here we are with this. And is there going to
that
be
whole year was like political catastrophe and plague and fires and
I know, when did the
brimstone and food famine, like it was just like the biblical.
That was my comment always, when did the locusts show up? But I mean, what you talked, I'm still an optimist, but I'm old, that kind of. But I also think that, one thing when you get old is you've survived so many train wrecks that you say, I wouldn't worry about this too much. But
I think it's a combination of things are probably not sustainable. There is going to be a change at some point, and kids just have access to information where they were able to ask that question at 6 to Google, whereas most people get to college and they're like, whoa, what if nothing means anything? This is the first time they encounter Nietzsche or anything is, in their 20s. And now kids are sitting with that stuff at 5, which is
they're deprived of the pleasure of ignorance that others have enjoyed And I was to say, when you talk to a 7-year-old who sounds like Schopenhauer, that's very sobering.
Mm. Well, so did you ever study Jung or do any Jungian psychology, or were you just kind of interested in myth
All of the
and the
above, actually,
yeah,
all of the above.
just a prolific reader?
Yes. Well, also the other thing too is I actually had a group of friends who had a Jungian reading group, and this
Oh
is
wow.
almost 40 years ago, and that was really interesting. And I read German, so I was another reason to read Jung. And unlike Freud, Jung is readable in German.
Mm-hmm.
Freud hurts my brain when I try reading him in German, but Jung I can get through pretty easily. And it's interesting because I like when he discusses his trips, like his trips among the American Indians, and describes his experiences with them and so forth, and how their mythology informs their sense of meaning and how they navigate through life. And I think that that's something that I'm still obsessed with. And
Mm-hmm.
my poetry, reflects that as well. But I always feel like life is hard enough,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you feel the same way. If you can somehow help people navigate through life, you're making your own life meaningful.
Yeah. I mean, I love the job that I have now, just being able to sit with patients. I don't like the business part is kind of a means to an end, just to make sure other people can work and we can build a clinic. But I don't live for that. I live for just sitting in a room with people and helping them make meaning, even when you can't make meaning of something.
Yeah, that's true. And
Present.
work always interrupted my gardening and poetry writing. It's just a shame. And winemaking, that was another thing interrupted,
You make wine.
Yeah, of course. And I got to do that. That's good for we live in Texas and we have grapes. I mean, what's wrong with, it's all good
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, but it is. I've always felt most useful thing we can do is help other people navigate through life. That's, I guess, the way I would put it. And mythology is built to help people navigate through life. I mean, my second
It's an attempt to make meaning,
Yeah, my second book, Living Myths, like each stage of your life has a myth that got a myth of some culture or many cultures that help you to navigate that phase of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and I know you've read them, but just for the listeners, in case anyone's not familiar, the Iliad and Mircea did Sacred and the Profane, which is a pretty early book about study of religion and mythology. And one of the things he did was, he would find these Aboriginal tribes that had a stick, and the whole history of the tribe is written on the stick, and then the stick is the tent pole of your tent, and then in the morning it falls in a direction, and then you go where the stick tells you to go.
And the Great World Axis. That's what
yeah,
talking about. I
and
remember it so well.
So that's what was making their meaning, And if the stick pointed to a river, oh great, the stick wanted us to have water. Thank you, stick. If it goes to a mountain, oh, it's a holy mountain. Thank you, stick. I appreciate it. And he would talk to the tribes where the stick would have been lost in a flood or stolen by an enemy or something, and the people would just wander and die. Like they had no ability to make meaning without the stick.
And how
But,
many
I mean, the primal
people do we encounter, right?
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Is we've lost our stick, or we're fighting about which stick. The sticks say to go different directions. But I mean, that's the primal myth. Is it's just this is order and this is chaos, and somebody goes from order into chaos and then turns the chaos into order. That's the primal myth, and you can get into all the archetypes that make that process more complicated. But that's all it is. It's what psychology is. It's what religion is, and it's what myth is.
Well, look at Hindu mythology too, right? It's like, things are going to be created, they're going to decay, and they're going to be destroyed. You can't get around it. But it'll happen again and again and again. And I always tell people, I say, that's a very pessimistic worldview. I said, is it really? Not really. Not really. It's a realistic point of view that, I've been reading.
Well, and that everything is a dream. That Vishnu is dreaming everything into existence, but eventually, when Krishna wakes up, they'll just be gone. Well, you
already know the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi. Okay.
I don't know.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
It just stimulated the Zhuangzi story. Zhuangzi had this thing called Zhuangzi's butterfly. And Martin Heidegger thought this was the coolest thing ever. Okay. He thought this was very exciting. And which Zhuangzi said, I woke up from a dream where I was a butterfly and I was, flitting about from flower to flower and getting nectar and all this happy stuff. And then I woke up and I was Zhuangzi again. And he said, am I a butterfly that dreams about Zhuangzi, or am I Zhuangzi who dreams about being a butterfly? And I just love that story. And then he said, it was fun being a butterfly. And I just like the way he said that, though. It's like, and Martin Heidegger thought that was a great story. He was a big fan of that story.
It's probably challenging to some of Heidegger's stuff too, because he was all that language is the house of being, and you're trapped within cognition. So if you're a butterfly and you don't have language and you still exist, what are you?
Ready? Sein und Unsein und Dasein. Yeah, he was a happy guy.
Yeah, it's been a long time since my Heidegger classes at Swanee.
I was
being in time is not a fun read in English.
No.
Like
Unsein. Anyway, it just sounds so awful in German. Anyway, actually, I'm a great fan, though, of Karl Jaspers in that group, because he was a great fan of myth. And he was the man who came up with the idea of the axial age. All these great religious thinkers emerged around the world somewhat simultaneously. And, some, I think, did inform each other and some did not. But he's a great one for saying, he never took a Jungian tack, but he was a great one, though, for saying that, it's all about meaning. People have got, like you said about this materiality of the stick, it's all about meaning. Everything everybody wants to do is about finding meaning and navigating life.
Mm-hmm.
And that you can tell people what to expect in life, but until they experience it, they don't know how to navigate it. That's very
well, and our order making. I mean, I think part of the contradiction of human nature is our order making principle. Our ego, that is the organizing principle of the psyche, is what stops us from making meaning, because we cling to it and too rigidly. And so we have to dissolve it and then go under the ego and under language, even into the body and the emotional and the transcendental space. Absolutely. And that is how we come back from the descent, like Campbell says in The Hero's Journey, or Jung says with the shadow, we come back with a greater meaning but we can't quite take all of the information from that place with us,
Well, that was like Tillich too, like Tillich's view that the whole process of life is finding God behind God. In other words, what you think of as God is going to be shattered by what God is in reality to you in the next phase. And I always like that thought that Tillich had about that, because
it doesn't stop, that the reality of God continues to unfold as you know it and as you grow.
Right. And it's the reality of self as well.
Well, and I think that's the problem with a lot of different models of psychology, is that they're perfectly fine if you're here, So if you're like coming out of recovery, or if you're 21 and you broke up with your boyfriend for the first time in college, or if they're fine with helping you with that. But 10, 20 years of cognitive behavioral therapy, I can't imagine you'd be doing the same thing.
No.
Like, what is it? Irvin Yalom's the existential philosopher, or the existential psychologist, and he would always kind of poke fun at the cognitive people that don't really do anything other than ego management strategies, which is fine, But it was always like, I mean, when CBT therapists get sick, why do they come see me? Why don't they go to another CBT therapist if it's so great? And it's a script, you're if the client says this, then you say this. It's manualizable, and because it's manualizable, you already know how it works, so there's no point in going to see one. And then there's a lot of people too who say they do CBT, but then when you sit with them in therapy, or you work with them, they're really doing more of an attachment existential thing. They've figured out,
physician, heal thyself.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, all these metaphors for mythology, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things, is it can kind of take part of psychology. The thing that is challenging is you got to take people outside of their experience to make them kind of doubt their assumptions, but that is threatening. So you have to do that in a way that doesn't make somebody defensive. And mythology is a great way to do that, because you're taking somebody and you're being like, hey, this is what's going on with you, but you're not saying that. You're being like, there was this centaur, Chiron, and he could heal everybody, but he had this wound that he couldn't heal. But I think the reason that he could heal everyone is because he was in such pain. And then the person's like, oh, holy shit, that's me. Oh my God.
Oh, he was, and Chiron was a centaur of attention.
He was a what?
The centaur of attention.
Oh, what do you mean there?
the center of attention. I was trying to make a
Okay.
bad pun.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, when you
The
have
voice
to
kind of cut out.
when you have to
Go ahead.
explain a joke, it's not that good a joke, right?
Sorry, the audio kind of dipped for a minute, and I thought
The
I was just
spin power of
I
it.
thought the noise canceling was mushing
But
your words.
what's really interesting is when I talk to young people, especially, and they're talking about Game of Thrones, I just kind of sit back and grin because, hey, I can give you Games of Thrones mythology from here till heck won't have it, right? Because it's so much of and I really what Martin wrote in Game of Thrones is really brilliant, but it's all very mythologically based, and all of the themes and archetypes and even episodes are mythologically based. And why does that resonate? Well, you and I know why it resonates, because this is their own human journey, and they're seeing things, seeing conflict, and seeing issues that maybe not play obviously in the warrior stance of their daily life, but they play in their daily life. All of those things, betrayal and loyalty and victory and defeat and failure and success
And ambition, and not
ambition.
realizing that you're the bad guy.
Exactly.
being identifying with your own victimhood and suffering, that you don't realize that you're victimizing others.
Yes, and scuttling yourself. And that's what I always think is really interesting is telling a person the most painful things you ever tell the other human being is, what you're doing is scuttling yourself. But it's true, and it's a great theme in the mythology that the hero is just blindly rushing ahead, and his vulnerability is obvious to all of us watching him, but everyone but him. And then you say that it speaks to the human tendency to be not introspective enough to see where you're going to scuttle yourself. I thought that was very interesting. I mean, the Achilles.
Could you parse what you mean by scuttle there for the listener?
Oh, I'm sorry. Like you scuttle a ship, like you cause it to sink. I'm sorry, I'm used to that term. Thank you.
Yeah, that just makes sure everyone can understand. I mean, we feel like the enemy is out here, but really the thing defeating us is inside.
You trip yourself. That's right. You trip yourself. You defeat. I don't want to use the word defeat yourself because that's a little bit too
final. Yeah.
But you trip yourself. You you set yourself back through choices you've made. That you are not seeing the fact that those choices will set you back.
Have you ever read Neil Gaiman? You ever read him?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I read a lot of Neil Gaiman in high school.
You look behind me on the shelves, you will see much Neil Gaiman.
I always felt like he was a more interesting thinker than a writer. Like his writing is kind of in service of the idea, not the idea in service of the writing, which I like. I like stuff. I get really bored when it's like people will probably be up in arms, but like something like Lolita, like I have a hard time going through because it's so well done, but it's just kind of this character thing and you're reinforcing the theme. And like, I want super rich, density of ideas in the things. And Gaiman's not the best writer, at least he wasn't. With the American Gods era, he was kind of shifting from comics to that. But Ocean at the End of the Lane, I really think is like a perfect book. It's like that's the book he was trying to write for 10 years.
That's so funny. And I've always thought of him as a great narrator. He was a narrative guy.
Yeah. He's a structure guy.
Yeah, structure. What I mean, how would I put it? Who would you rather have at the coffee pot? Him or Vladimir Nabokov, the guy who wrote Lolita? I would take Gaiman any day. Because I think he's very astute. He is very attuned and intuitive to human beings and what make them tick. And that's why I have always liked him. I always like Robert Graves for that reason, because he was very good in saying, here's what happened, that myth. Now, what does that make you think about? What does that remind you of? That was like, he doesn't say it in so many words, but he leads you to that point, like, well, now what does that remind you of? And I love that because it's like somebody said to me, why in the heck are you reading mythology? That stuff is dead. That stuff's old. It's like, I don't care. Let's open a myth, and I do in the book, and let's read it. Who does that remind you of? Does that ring a bell? And it always does.
Well, at Ocean and the End of the Lane, kind of what we were talking about, that making order out of chaos, and that all psychology is this descent to let go of what we think we are to become what we really are and accept change and all that. And there's like a metaphor towards the end of that book where narrator's talking about going into the ocean, and they're like, as they are dissolving in the ocean, they're like, I am able to understand how everything works. I'm able to see from all perspectives. I'm able to understand. I see everything so clearly, but that can't fit into a person. And if you stay there, you become nothing. You
Yeah,
become everything, but you
that's
become
true.
nothing because
That's
you
exactly true.
dissolve,
And look at the Bhagavad Gita with Arjuna and Krishna's conversation. It's like if you do what you think you're supposed to do, you're going to be doing exactly the wrong thing. And if you do what you're supposed to do, it's going to break your heart. And I always thought that was just the most brilliant analysis of human life, right?
Well, and the Bhagavad Gita, that's one of my favorite lines is that, "Behold, I have become time. Even without your sword, all these warriors return into dust and die."
Oh,
He's
yeah.
trying. He's the book. If anyone, it's a Hindu religious book, but Vishnu is trying to convince a prince to go into a battle and fight, and the prince is trying to navel gaze and not do it.
Well,
And
he's
he's
also
showing him,
saying, I meant to kill my relatives. That's the
yeah,
reason.
he's trying to avoid this complicated decision, and he says, well, look, I've become time. Even without your sword, all these people will turn to dust and die. Even if you do nothing.
Yeah. And the other thing I always liked it too is Arjuna is for the audience's perspective in the story, it's part of a greater thing called the Mahabharata,
Mhm.
which is a Hindu epic. And it's the segment of where Arjuna, the charioteer, is about to go into battle against his cousins. And it's the epic battle of good and evil. But some are good and some are evil, and some are a little bit more good than evil. And there's a little bit more going on there. And Krishna shows up and says, you've got to do something. This is your duty. Okay. This is your dharma. This is what you were made to do. And the guy's, nah, I don't want to do this. Here are the reasons why.
Mhm.
And it's a great discussion because like every human being goes through that.
Well, it's not
Especially,
really about war or not war. It's about the way that we make decisions and make meaning. I mean, so
oh yeah,
many of the
of course.
people who are citing the Bhagavad Gita, like Gandhi, they're citing it as a work of arguing for peace and
Well, it is.
arguing for
No,
nonviolence. But the
the
whole
context
text is
is
a
war.
debate about a guy
Yeah.
needs to go fight a war against his family.
But the context is where what leads to the point you just made, which is, and regardless of who wins this war, you're all going to be gone. Your victory is not that big a deal.
There
And
are no winners in time.
no, and this is how it is. And I love reading the Bhagavad Gita. I've read it many, many, many times. In fact, on my bedstead, I've got a Bible and I have Gandhi's translation of the Bhagavad Gita because he has all these like, little commentaries in there in the margins of, well, here's what I think was in Arjuna's mind. Here's what I think
Hmm.
Krishna was trying to tell him.
Hmm.
It was written, his translation was written for businessmen and people who really weren't Sanskrit scholars, but needed to read the Bhagavad Gita. So it's my favorite version that I have.
Well, I mean, I think we've kind of answered the question about why mythology is important to study and why it's a part of psychology. What about poetry? I mean, that's the other half of the stuff that you do. You're a poet now. You've got a blog about poetry. Do you publish poems on print, or do you just do them on the web?
I'm doing on the blog now, and I'm in the process of doing some in print. I'm also in the process of translating my poetry into Turkish, that's my little intellectual exercise to keep my old brain cells working. But I've had a really good response to the website, and I encourage people, of course, to look at it and also make comments.
We'll
And
link to it in the show notes.
sure, and one of the things I put in there, by the way, is the critics were somewhat right, is what I say, because I address the issue of criticism and how when you are doing anything like writing or painting or thinking, that there's criticism, and how do you take constructive criticism? And in retrospect, you realize that a lot of the criticism, whatever the person's motive, is useful, is very
Hmm.
useful, and helps you to think. And you can say, yeah, well, his or her, motive was terrible. They just didn't like me. Okay, but maybe they said something you may want to consider. And
Hmm.
that was one topic I've done. But I try to do things that I think I listen to people, and I try to do things that help them navigate, right? And it's somewhat informed by mythology, it's somewhat informed by introspection and philosophy. And a couple of the poems that are really popular, if I may, I'll read them for you.
Ooh, that would be wonderful. I'd love for you to read some.
Oh, thanks. Well, the one that is most popular and written is Unselfing. And there's a prologue to it. Bertrand Russell uses the term unselfing to describe the practice of going outside yourself, your needs, and your present situation to connect with others and with things greater than oneself. I should say yourself. I realize an inconsistency there. In Russell's case, the wonders of science, mathematics, and the universe. This led to a meditation on unselfing. For Christians, it seems particularly appropriate during Lent, which is now. And I also think it's very fitting for Ramadan's, or for Muslims in Ramadan. So I'll read it for you. Myself is me. Imagine myself as a hot air balloon with many heavy rocks attached to it by ropes, anchoring it firmly to the ground. The balloon is my spirit, and the rocks are my own concerns, needs, wishes, worries, desires, preoccupations, preconceived notions, prejudices, fears, and worries about things that will never happen. If I am in this balloon and look down, that is all I see. I look up, however, I see the infinite sky. And I know that if I cut the ropes to these rocks weighing me down, the balloon will soar and I will see new panoramas. I will see others. I will see the place I had been from a loftier height and see just how small it is. Unself. Cut the ropes to your own petty concerns and soar. Move higher towards visions beyond myself, toward things greater than the self where I am. My spirit will rise beyond the self that weighs me down. And as I rise and soar, what was once large becomes small. My heart expands beyond me to embrace others. And what was small in my spirit becomes greater as it rises. That was
beautiful.
Thank you. That was fun. I enjoyed it. I do my writing of poems. I'm going to tell you, this is kind of fun. Early in the morning, when I first get up, I think, I ponder, I meditate, I read things, and I make little notes, right? And I do that one day, and the poem usually gets written a day or two later, because I then end up arguing with myself, saying, that's not what you want to say. That's kind of stupid. Or that sounds awfully, Vaseline on the lens, Hallmarky, so don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how these things come out. Another one I'm going to read is one of my most popular ones I've seen gotten good feedback on. It's called, What Does It Matter to Me? And I'm going to warn you up front, it's very straightforward. Not a lot of metaphor to work through or anything. It starts with a quote, if you feel pain, you are alive. If you feel another's pain, you're human, by Leo Tolstoy. Guess what this is inspired by the way? I'll let you hear the whole poem go, oh yeah, I get it. What does it matter to me when there's a war on the other side of the earth? Very sad, quite tragic. Sorry to hear about that. But it isn't my war. What does it matter when there's an earthquake on the other side of the earth that kills as many people as live in most small towns? Tragic. I feel sorry for them. What a shame. Should I buy a hot tub? We really should install track lighting in the dining room. What does it matter that a child is hungry on the other end of the earth? After all, people shouldn't have so many children. Well, it matters, I suppose, really, but they always have problems there. If it's on the other side of the world, I really can't see it. So it doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. Or does it matter? It isn't my problem. If it appears on the screen, I can change the channel and relax by watching a zombie apocalypse. The human condition is so tragic, but it's not my condition. Well, perhaps that's the real tragedy, because they're humans and then there's me. My indifference means that I'm not human, but some other kind of creature. But if I see the things I'd rather not see, it will make me human, and then those things will matter to me. The empty stomach of a child will become the emptiness in my heart. The empty hand of another will matter when it touches my hand. And fullness of soul is when other souls matter. Beauty of face is not an expensive cream, but in seeing the beauty of another human face in our eyes. And the best defense against aging is a maturity that is so young that it sees itself in a hungry child. And you both matter a little more. And you both are undeniably human. Perhaps human evolution means becoming more human. And the discovery of the amount of room in the human heart is our next great discovery.
Wow, that is there is a complexity to that is very affecting.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that one on your blog. Is that an older one?
Oh yeah, it's ancient, February 11th. It's an old timer. Would you like another one, or then am I going to bore you?
No, please, and say the website too, so we can
Yeah,
people can make sure they can find you everywhere that you are.
Very hard to find. It's jfbierlein.com. But now, since my name is not quite phonetic in English, it's Bierlein. And absolutely, and since I'm a great lover of gardening and wine, I planted lots of grapes, and I wrote a poem about it called Dormant. I just love that word. Does it sound awful? Dormant. I planted some grapes and was warned that they looked dead, but they're merely dormant. Sure enough, beneath that appearance, I nicked a vine with my jackknife and saw green inside. But the right combination of sun, rain, and warm soil, and it will spring to life, send out shoots, and eventually yield fat, juicy grapes. And we'll drink that wine for many years to come. It would have been easy to declare the vines dead. By all appearances, they were gone. What a waste that would have been. There have been dormant times in my life and yours. Things seem dead, inert, even sterile, completely devoid of any growth. In these times of anxiety and fear, I had to reach deep inside myself to find that speck of green. It seems that nothing would bear fruit, and that one is at a dead end. Others may have decided that you were finished and done, but you weren't. It appears so to them. But if you know there's still that green alive in you, with the right combination of hope, faith, and the warm soil of the heart, you too will sprout out and reach out your branches. You have no idea of the fruit you'll bear. You have no idea of what fine things will come with the years. Learn the magic, that the magic of dormancy is not death, but the staging for magnificent things. And learn the mystery of seasons in our life, and the hope arising that seasons change. None of the seasons last, but we can.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. I'll just have to garden some more and write some more poems, huh?
Yeah, I need to. You do audio recordings of any of them? Sometimes, like we're noticing that younger generations, like if I recommend books or something, like they won't do it unless it's recorded. But
Well,
like the Audible seems to be boosting everyone's
I
sales.
think we'll have to do this. We'll have to do this and credit Joel Blackstock on his excellent suggestion. I think that's a great idea.
Audible publishing is pretty easy. You need a nice mic. You can read it yourself and just upload it, and then if it sells, they send you a cut of it. Amazon does.
Well, all right. We'll investigate that, Joel. I mean, actually, I will pick your brain at another time, and we'll figure it out in the next track.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people who have aspiring writers have sent emails, and I've told them that, or current writers. But if you got books that haven't sold for a while or something, they're not highly circulated. You can just go back and either pay somebody, $200 to record the book on Fiverr or something, one of those contractor sites, or you just read it yourself and upload it. And people looking for an audiobook that have the Audible subscription will start doing it. And old classics are getting rediscovered that way.
And also, too, I mean, if any of your patients have issues with insomnia, I can read. That'll help.
Mm-hmm.
So it can help.
You ever read Penn Warren, Robert Penn Warren?
Oh, yeah. I love Robert Penn Warren.
His stuff is very hard to find. Like in Nashville, my friend lived in Nashville, and so there were all these. He would go to all these antique stores and used book places, and we had all these books. And then throughout the years, some of them got lost, and it was like, well, I'll just order another copy. And it's like you can't find a ton of his poetry anthologies
of modern quote unquote, and I say in quote unquote, American verse that my mom bought in like 1958 or something. And I still have that thing, and I've got it all marked up, and it's got post-it notes, and coffee stains, and I think tears. I think it's got all the works in there. And that book contains a number of his poems.
I think A Way to Love God and Waiting are two of my favorite ones.
Oh, they're lovely. I also, I'm a big fan of, T.S. Eliot. I'm a big fan of T.S. Eliot. I'm also a great fan of Frost. I know Frost has become kind of like overly popular, but Frost is very good for navigating.
Well, and overly romanticized. I mean, a lot of his stuff is a lot bleaker than people will let it be.
Oh,
They don't
well,
want to sit with the, and the story about him waking his daughter up at night. You familiar with that?
I don't know that story.
He was drinking whiskey and he went and got his daughter up with his gun and was like, "Come downstairs," and kept like holding the gun and being like, "Who do you love more, me or your mom?" and drinking whiskey until she was like, "No, Dad, I can't choose." And then the sun came up and he got tired and he finally went to bed. But it's just like he was not a well guy.
Well, I kind of changed a few things. I'm gonna have to go back and do some revisiting of Frost.
That came from my poetry professor at Swan. He said,
I've
obviously
never
didn't see that
heard-
happen firsthand.
I've never heard that before, but that is. Well, I'm on to know.
Wyatt Prunty was the professor who taught poetry to me, and he was Swanee. So he knew a lot of things about poets, especially the Southern agrarians and the Inklings, that were not common knowledge because he knew people who had seen it.
He knew people who knew people.
So he knew the dirt on the people. So it's like would be at Swanee and he'd be like, "Oh, that's the balcony that Alan Tate held this other poet off and he said he was going to drop him if he didn't recount all the women he'd slept with, and then all the women left the party, and then it turned into this huge rager, and then this other poem was composed." I don't even remember all the stories, but it was just like, things you can't Google because they were first or second hand accounts of these guys.
Is, you hear these things and boy, you feel very well adjusted. I always get a kick out of that. I hear the string go, really? that's something. That's pretty that's pretty edgy.
Behind the flowery language, is this insanity. Or what is Penwarren was really good friends with what's his name? Who's the guy that wrote Deliverance?
Oh, Dickey.
Not Dickey. Yeah, I was going to say Duffy, and that's wrong. That was and Dickey. I think Dickey was stalking at Swanee like right before he died of alcoholism too.
Dickey had a rough life. Dickey was horribly. Golly, you're talking about people with depression. Dickey was on the top of that list. He was pretty serious. I'm trying to think who else it was. I just finished reading.
The Joel Cohen is super into the Cohen brothers. He loves existentialism and Spinoza and all this stuff. And he spent a really long time trying to get the James Dickey book made. There's a script of Joel Cohen adapting a James Dickey book, which is really interesting.
Spinoza's best quote that I tell everyone when I have a chance is, "What Peter says about Paul tells you more about Peter than it does about Paul." That is from Spinoza, believe it or not. I always thought that was a brilliant quote.
Well, and the thing I like about Penwarren is his books are kind of poems, and his poetry is kind of prose.
It is,
and that's why I'd ask you, because you were reading something that was just a series of statements that was not overly ornate, that turns into, just by the way that these simple statements are arranged, this beautiful thing. And Penwarren would kind of do that, where he's just being like, "Oh, the way that sheep chew grass and their eyes watch the sky."
Yes, I know what you're saying, and Penwarren has a very nice way of lulling you into this happy place and then biting you. You know what I mean? It's like,
oh yeah,
it's like you lulled into, well, this is a pretty bucolic image, and all of a sudden, boom, something nasty hits.
That's that in Waiting. It's like, you think I speak in riddles, but I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
The world means nothing but itself.
It's lovely. I'm glad you enjoyed that poem, and I'm glad you enjoyed poetry. That's wonderful.
And my wife likes to, I think I've never seen her roll her eyes harder than when our first child, was taking her first step. And she was like, "Oh my gosh." And Violet stood up and walked. And I recited the Ovid, the animals must cast their gaze upon the grass to trod, but humankind can stand erect to avert its eyes to God. She's just like, she was not
priceless. That's priceless.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, so can you talk about the transition from mythology to poetry?
So much of what we know as mythology was poetry, or is poetry.
Sure. But
the greatest thing I always tell people is say, well, what's the difference between mythology and poetry? And I'll say, well, go see Ovid, go see Hesiod, go see Homer, go see the writers of the Mahabharata, go see these guys. Look at them. It's all poetry. It was recited as poetry. The epics were recited epics. They all are poetry. And poetry's always been the way of conveyance of the elements of meaning.
Well, in pre-writing, that was how you would memorize it. If somebody told the story, you could change stuff. But if somebody else could invent a new thing. But if every end of the line rhymes with the next thing and there's a meter, then you can't change it. You got to memorize it.
What's funny is people immediately recognize poetry as separate from prose or basic narrative instantly. It's almost like I don't even know if they have to be taught. It's a fascinating thing to me. I think there's some innate poetic thing going on with people. And in mythology, it works the same way. They instinctively know what the story is. They instinctively know that it's not an objective recounting of something. It's like, I always find it fascinating with both poetry and mythology. You have to explain to people the difference from, usually at least, for most sane people, I should say, you don't have to explain the difference from normal stated narrative. And they know that conveys something different than normal stated narrative. And, a few times I recall talking to people, and I remember years ago thinking, this person's speaking poetically. They don't know they are, but they're speaking poetically. And I would tell them and say, what do you mean by that? And I would say, you're not speaking in normal narrative. It's not like, we need some coffee creamer. You're speaking about conveying to me a very complicated concept of negotiating our way through human existence in a relatively simple way that I can grasp. And that, I think, is what poetry and mythology do.
Yeah, and I think there's something about poetry that when people have kind of a rigid ego, when they kind of cling to logic or existential whatever, it bothers them,
Yeah.
I don't remember, there's certain types of people that if a poem or something is in a book, they start to roll their eyes. And I think it's a lot of why Jung is on the outside, Carl Jung is on the outside of the medical institution and probably always will be, is, what is it in school? They said, like, well, you can't be a Jungian because there's no way to objectively disprove it. The theory isn't valid because there's no way to objectively disprove it. And it's like, there's no way to disprove a metaphor. Like, it's not a literal psychology. It's
it wasn't built that way. His book, The Answer to Job, is I always felt was an amazing piece of poetry. Really, you read The Answer to Job? It's very good, and it's the problem of misery and why do we suffer and all these things, and it's very poetic to read. It makes you go back and read the biblical book of Job and get some new insights out of it. But it tells you about the awareness that derives from suffering, and that suffering is an important element in navigating one's way through life. That suffering generates values.
The last line of the Red Book is "Thank you for the suffering."
Yeah. That's right. I plagiarized, didn't I?
Yeah.
Suffering generates values.
I may be wrong there. That's my memory, but
yeah.
The Red Book.
So I just find that really interesting that to look at things that way. And what is tragedy? Tragedy is a finger wagging form of wisdom, isn't it? What is tragic? What is tragic is meaningful. I always tell people that. What is truly tragic is always meaningful.
That sounds like Simone Weil. You read Simone Weil or any of the mystics?
Of course. But
they got the publisher perfect. They did, the publisher did this republishing of a bunch of Greek plays, and they would have like historical photographs on the different things. Like for the Agamemnon, it's like Mussolini going into Italy and different things. And but for the Antigone, there was just a picture of Simone Weil. Like it's like perfect. I mean, that's just a perfect thing, because there's such a melancholy sadness that you get this person who is so wise, but is also kind of halfway in this world and halfway out.
Oh yeah, one of my worst puns of all time, though, I must say, is Euripides, believe it or not. Like you've heard of Ripley's Believe It or Not, but I always
Yeah,
you can find it in Euripides, Believe It or Not. Oh,
that's
it's
clever.
Oh yeah, some people find that tiresome, but it's fun. Well, I'm going to cut us off in a minute here. We can keep going for a few minutes yet, but I'm going to.
Yeah, you've got a meeting coming up, so I don't want to keep you past that. But
this is more fun.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. We'd love to do a part 2 or something. Maybe we could do just kind of a poetry reading or something.
Well, another thing too is if you're ever in Texas, you can drink some of my wine with me.
Oh yeah, that'd be wonderful. We do some work with another clinic down there, and we're thinking they have a thing here, so I might maybe at some point. I don't know. One of my good friends is from there, but I don't travel a ton after the kids, and pretty much just work and do stuff with my kids.
Really. Listen, you have a wonderful day, and it's been a joy to talk to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Let me stop the recording, and then is there anything else that you want to plug that you want to talk about? People can get your books. Are the books still for sale on Amazon?
They sure are.
So Parallel Myths and Living Myths by J.F. Bierlein. Anything else?
What did you say by Robert Frost?
Yeah. I don't know why Robert was in my head. I don't know what else.
I swear I never drink whiskey and use a gun, so I don't think to worry.
Let's see. All right. So those books are on Amazon, and then jfbierlein.com. That's jfbierlein.com. And we'll link to that in the show notes and in the notes on the YouTube. But check it out. And thank you so much for making time to sit with us.